So, wind up with the song, why not? Time goes by, as we all know, naturally. People come and people go, naturally. Let's be natural. Ever since the world began, let's be natural. Every woman, every man, let's be natural. Has followed nature's plan, let's be natural. Yeah. That ought to do. When I was 20-something, I could not imagine being 50. But you get there, and then I met a wonderful lady called Jean Darling at a silent film festival in Bristol, and she was 80-something then. And she was one of the gang, our gang. She was the blonde girl. And she was there because she knew Laurel and Hardy, and then they used to walk across from one lot to the other, and they liked her too. And they'd got her a special chair with Jean Darling written on the back. And she was such a lovely lady to talk to. And she said, every 10 years, I look ahead 10 or 15 years to find another role model. And I think we could all do with, that sort of sensible sort of advice, how to be, just how to be better than the stereotype, because who knows, we don't know our potential, and yeah, mortality is real, There's that moment in the Woody Allen biography where it's a full big close-up of him. He's saying, I was a happy-go-lucky kid till about 5 when somebody told me about mortality. What do you mean it's not forever? And it kind of explains a lot of his attitude to a lot of things, Right. But I think humans have a problem with reality in that, they don't really take it seriously. The wonderful thing about the human brain is, it convinces itself that this is the most important thing, is what you internalize and things like that. But we are sociable animals, supposed to be, but we tend to forget some of the things that the genes and the evolution has given us, if you can say evolution in America, I don't know. But it's all up there for arguing with, and may the arguments continue. But I mean, it's been going on a long time. As Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. So, yeah, we could leave it there. What brings me to San Diego is the possibility of doing a tour of the USA with the legendary Rutles. And before I go on, I think some people have heard of the Rutles and some people have not. And it's quite complicated to describe a band which came out of a good idea at the time. But they don't really have a comfort zone in the music business, because it was thrown together to soften the blow of the Beatles breaking up over 40 years ago. And it did seem a good idea at the time. A lot of people agreed, George Harrison, Mick Jagger, Paul Simon, Saturday Night Live, and some of the Pythons. And I think it's quite funny, actually. At the moment, there's a film called Yesterday, where they pretend the world doesn't know the Beatles existed. But 40 years ago, that's what we did. The Rutles pretended the Beatles didn't exist in order to tell their story in a more humorous way, to sort of to give a hug to the people who were hurting at the fact that they'd broken up and wouldn't get back together again. So it was never a career move, and to some extent it still isn't. But over those 40 years, 20 years ago, we started going out and playing the songs. And I came to New Jersey to do a festival for Beatle fans, and was staggered to learn that all the Beatle fans were Rutle fans. And I spent the afternoon signing Rutle albums. And then people were saying also that, the archaeology, that was our one, analogy, no, what was it called? Anthology. The Beatles anthology was coming out, and what were the Rutles going to do? And so, well, to cut a long story short, we went out and played the songs, and people knew the songs. They threw tea bags at us, and they knew the story, and now, people come along and they sing a song, and it's pretty much all generations. And in fact, evokes the first impression I got when I went to one of these festivals, where there were families just shutting the world outside, and they were sitting under the stairs with guitars, just playing Beatles songs. And it was a whole atmosphere. It was lovely. And it's lovely in a way that the Rutles have, in their own parallel universe, sort of drawn alongside in the lane with Beatle fans and things like that. So that's what we do. And as a songwriter, there's no finer thing than having a room full of people singing one of your songs. And we have humorous moments, and we have moments which are thoughtful. And we love doing it, and so that's why we're still doing it. But it's still not a career move. It's because we love doing it, and people who know what we do love coming along and doing it with us.
Your first band of note, the Bonzo Dog Band, recorded its debut album, I believe, in 1966 at Abbey Road. Yeah. And concurrently, if I'm correct, the Beatles were down the hall recording Revolver. Is that accurate?
Very nearly, George. The very first single the Bonzos recorded was called My Brother Makes the Noises for the Talkies, and that was recorded at Abbey Road. And yes, if you can imagine a song like that, lots of sound effects were required, and there were no CDs of sound effects in those days, and you had to make them yourself. So we had hairbrushes and so and things like that. And I felt the call of nature, and I went out to find the restrooms. And in those days, Abbey Road had a front door and a corridor, and there was a studio off where we were, and there was other studios down there. I went down to some steps, and the restrooms were there. So I went to the restrooms, and on my way back, I was coming up the steps, and my head was about floor height, and the front doors were there. And all of a sudden, through the front doors, dramatically silhouetted by the sunlight outside in Abbey Road, were four guys with distinctive haircuts, dark glasses, trousers and pointy shoes, and two big minders. And I thought, gosh, it's them. Of course, they record here too, don't they? And it was intriguing, because I thought after half an hour I'd sneak out and see what they were up to. And I was able to listen through the door, and I could hear quite well what they were doing. And they were doing one of George's songs, I Want to Tell You. And and the grand piano in Studio 2 there, down the steps, someone was playing the E and the F, it's just so exciting, and the riff, and it was, I don't know, I'd never heard anything quite like it. And of course I had to go back into our studio and do My Brother Makes the Noises for the Talkies, and I kind of thought, well, I wonder what the guys are up to, really. And actually spool on, I was in George's kitchen talking about the same thing, about that actual story. And he said, oh yeah, I remember. And he went, and just outside the kitchen there's a little upright piano, and there was a guitar there. So I was doing we talked about the F over the E, and he picked up the guitar and he immediately played the riff, which is not the sort of thing you'd have to run it at least once, or I would, or twice. But he just did it straight away, so we just played it together on the thing. So that was a great kind of moment. But our first album, Gorilla, the Bonzos' first album, had a song on it called Death Cab for Cutie, which is the one that Paul chose to be in the Magical Mystery Tour.
can I take a guess that the humor that the Bonzo dog band had was a bond with the Beatles, that it was a shared sensibility?
Yeah, I think that's what I mean. It's sort of, I don't know anybody in the music business who isn't, pretty bloody good at what they do, who haven't got a sense of humor. And you pretty much you pick up on the same things and you talk about the same things. So but it's the music business is, over the years, I've grown to hate it. It is all about bean countings, seasonal things, turkeys at Thanksgiving, and demographics, and doing something like that. And it's ripping the soul out of music. Where, if you think, if you were a child in the early 20th century even, and a big brass band came marching into town, it would excite you, wouldn't it? Now you can't go anywhere without hearing bong, doors closing, and and it's everywhere, and it's almost being devalued as a moment to sort of savour the pure abstraction of it, because was it Schopenhauer, the philosopher, said that all music aspires to the condition, all art aspires to the condition of music, because it is one of the most abstract things, but it is a kind of a species glue in a way.
Do you recall when you first heard the Beatles, and did they have a big impact on you, or not till later?
I was at art school and in Norwich, a little provincial town, and it came across, Love Me Do and all that early stuff, and I thought it was good. It was as good as anything, better. But didn't really start to take an interest in them until Penny Lane. And by then I was in a London art school, and I was running a film society, and this song sort of came across like a movie to me, all these different images. And I thought, this is inventive. This is really exciting. And so, yes, I became a kind of fan of where they were going, from then on.
A few years later, you got a phone call from Eric Idle, not yet of Monty Python, because
they were Monty Python, yeah.
And he makes you an offer?
Yes, that's right, yeah. Because we'd worked together on the children's television program Do Not Adjust Your Set before they'd become Pythons, with Michael Palin, Terry Jones, and the Bonzos, and Terry Gilliam. He suddenly phoned up, because we became good friends over that thing, over that period. And he said, do you fancy coming up to the television centre? I said, why? He said, well, our warm-up man's ill. So I said, I don't do warm-ups. He said, well, it's 25 quid. So I said, all right, done. But mainly just to sort of see how, to meet the other guys, again. And not that I'd met John or Graham. So after they recorded the show, we went out to a Chinese meal. We were all sat around this round table, and it turned out they were going to make some records, and they'd been writing some songs, and they needed some help. So I said, well, I'm only happy to. So what sort of songs have you written? And Eric said, well, Michael's written this thing about agrarian reform in the Middle Ages. So I was thinking, oh, all right. And Cleese immediately sort of says, what sort of music do you think? Because Cleese is not, Cleese is legally trained. He doesn't sort of spontaneously lean towards anything spontaneous. So what sort of music for that? And I said, I don't know, reggae, So it was like that.
How did Rutland Weekend Television beget, I believe, one song that in turn begot the Rutles?
So I had the idea of doing a spoof of A Hard Day's Night, and because it would be black and white, people speeded up, running around, cheap wigs, whatever. And I went to Eric and said, well, I've got this. And he said, that's great, because I've got this, which is a documentary maker who's so dull the camera runs away from him. And so those two were put together and put in an episode. And but that, did eventually lead on to how it all became. You wanted all that detail or what? Because around the same time, Saturday Night Live were running a gag on the fact that Sid Bernstein was trying to get the Beatles back together again and offering them $20 million each and a killer whale as a pet, you know. And so they got George Harrison on, and Lorne Michaels was waving $3,000 in cash under George's nose. You know, say, all this can be yours, George, just get the guys back together again. And George is saying, what, all of this for me? And he said, no, we've got to, you know, share it with the other guys. Maybe you don't have to tell Ringo. You know, jokes like this. So the running of the gag went on to say that they announced the fact that Eric Idle was going to host a show because he said he could get the Beatles back together again for $300. And they spinned it out right to the end and said, well, in fact, you know, it's a bad phone line. He hasn't got the Beatles, he's got the Rutles. So they showed that clip from BBC television on Saturday Night Live. And the audience of Saturday Night Live just wrote in thousands, sort of saying, yeah, bring back the Rutles, yeah, get the Rutles back together again. And Lorne said, we should do the whole story. And went downstairs and in 20 minutes got the budget from making arguably the world's first rockumentary, All You Need Is Cash. And that's literally how it started, because people were heartbroken of the Beatles broken up. And it was such a good idea to sort of soften the blow in a way and tell the story in a funny way without the thing, because George got all the footage of the embryonic anthology together, and we watched it, and it's great for the early days and all the rest of it. But when Leggy dies and it all starts crumbling, you know, it's actually a downer, you know. And so we tried to, you know, make it more silly, you know. And this is where George came in. You know, he got us extra footage. He talked Mick Jagger into being in it, and Paul Simon, and things like that. And that's why we had the silly endings. And I just said, well, take a step back, folks, you know, because it had got to mania point, you know. I mean, I'm sure they didn't really want to be screamed off the road, but they'd had enough. They were thrown into the back of vans, driven at high speed, being thrown around in the thing, and they went, F this for a game of soldiers, you know. So this is how it all comes around. It was a fun thing to do, and it seemed a good idea at the time to sort of pretend the Beatles didn't exist.
So your phone rings once again, and was it literally, can you write 20 songs for the Rutles? How did that?
No, I was actually in New York. We'd literally done the show with the thing in, and I was sitting on a windowsill just waiting for, you know, that Lorne had come back and said, we got the go-ahead. We can do it. And they said, oh, great, we do this and that. And I thought, hang on, how many songs have I got to write? You know, and of course, then the penny suddenly dropped and everyone was looking at me. Do you think you can write 20 more Rutles songs by next Thursday lunchtime? You know, I said, I'll try. So that's how it began. And nobody really planned it, you know, but we found ourselves doing it. And that's what was so lovely about the whole thing. Everybody involved knew the story and kind of why we were doing it in a way. It was like just sort of a big gap had opened up, you know, because for whatever reason, the Beatles were like a social glue. You know, they held dreams together. They sort of made you think it was possible to have a better world, you know, where all you need is love. And you know, why can't we be nicer to each other and leave the bathroom as we wish to find it, you know? So that was gone. And I think today we can see we're sort of kind of missing that kind of collective narrative where people sort of felt they knew what was right and what was wrong.
Did you have an outline of a script to write the 20 songs to, or did you write the 20 songs first?
No. Yeah, the songs had to be... There was never much of a script, to be fair, only a chronology. And one of the things I thought, well, if I listen to any Beatles songs, I'm sunk, you know, because they're just so special. Well, it's just almost perfect in a way, so many of them. And I thought, better if I remember where I was when I heard them. you know, like being at art school, you know, doing something else and just having a mental picture of what I was doing when I heard Love Me Do, you know. And I remembered people around me, and I remembered being at school, in a co-ed school, you know. And so they were the hardest songs to write, like Hold My Hand and the simple love songs, you know. I've just seen your date outside, he's with another, you know, and that all that kind of, you know, really gruesome stuff teenagers go through. And then there was obviously the second film, and Eric was very helpful. He suggested Ouch as a title instead of Help. And, you know, Piggy in the Middle and Cheese and Onions and Let's Be Natural, they all, I kind of got to the core of what they'd done, what I was talking about earlier, this kind of collective narrative. And the second rule I had was the songs have to work with just one guitar or just a piano, and then I'll know their songs. And then you can do all the arrangements and the George Martin things and the production tricks. And that's pretty much as we went. And no, there are 3 Spanish inquisitions. No, the third thing was I needed, you know, Ollie Halsall, Ricky Fattar, John Halsey, and myself.
The Rutles.
The Rutles. Yeah, we put the album together along with the orchestrations and the mixing in 10 days. It's almost like the script, you know. Second album took even longer, but you know, the first album was, you know, was the only thing in the movie that came in under budget. And, you know, this is another side thing, but Eric did want to be on the album, but he chose to have appendicitis. And he had to have his appendix out, and it was getting quite desperate, you know, because we were filming in, 3 weeks' time after the thing. So he staggered down to the studio with a walking stick, you know, and said, I'm ready. I said, no, you're not. You know, and he was going, you know, and it doesn't make any sense, Eric, you know. Ollie knows the songs, you know, and I don't think he's ever forgiven me. I know he's wrong, but I did the right thing, but he's never forgiven me, you know, because it's his moment to be on the record.
When you're performing these songs, which are very well crafted in the movie, but some of them are quite funny, did you ever start laughing, and how did you maintain your composure if that was an issue?
Well, there was a couple of issues. When we did Ouch, it was just decided that an apple would be dropped on each of our heads, and we had to go, ouch. And if you notice Ricky, he's just laughing. He's not saying ouch at all. After about 20 attempts, you know, he just laughed every time an apple hit him on the head. So, okay, that's it, wrap, you know. But the other time where I was in the bath with the hairiest of hairs, you know, and Gwen Taylor, the brilliant actress, who's playing Chastity, my wife, dressed as a Nazi. You know, there we were, and there was no script, and it was kind of workshoppy, you know.
The Yoko Ono-inspired character is described in the movie as Hitler's daughter, if I recall. Mm-hmm. So I interviewed Yoko Ono, and I asked her what she and John Lennon thought of that. And she replied, quote, "We were not amused," unquote. And then I said, did you consider taking any legal action? And there was a very long pause. And she finally answered, we're very careful about what we litigate about. So I'm going to kind of invert this to some of those songs are such great homages to the Beatles while simultaneously poking at the Beatles in a very good-natured way. Were there any legal issues? I believe there might have been one song in particular where you were told that that's too close.
Well, it's a difficult one, this, because actually I didn't realize that, you know, I thought Yoko was a fan of the Rutles. But anyway, I don't think it ever came up. I mean, we sent a copy of the songs to John, and he listened to it, and he sent back a message saying, I think you might have trouble with Get Up and Go, because it's a bit like Get Back. And so we left it off the album, you know. But equally, I think he was, you know, just as fond of it as George was, you know, because I don't think the songs poked, you know, any hard fun at the Beatles. I mean, I just wanted to enhance, or homage, recognize what they'd achieved, And somebody asked John in New York, what he thought of the Rutles, and he answered by singing Cheese and Onions, So I don't think there's, I'm not so sure. It says in the script that he was Hitler's daughter.
No.
Hitler wasn't mentioned. She was the daughter of the man who started World War II, which is, a little gentler.
I'm bad at math, but if I count correctly, between the first Rutles album and the second Archaeology was an 18-year period.
Yeah.
And between Archaeology and Raw and Live was another 18-year period. Therefore, does that mean it'll be 18 years from when Raw and Live came out before the fourth Rutles album will come out?
I have no idea. There's no real plans for a third album or fourth album, because I did put out a thing called the Wheat album, which was remastering some of the demos for Archaeology, plus a couple of extra tracks. Like I thought the Swan Song, Rutles song, would be Imitation Song, which is kind of like Imagine. It has a piano riff, but nothing like. It's a completely. It's one of my songs done in that way. In fact, Archaeology was. I really wasn't that keen on doing any more Rutles, because I thought, because I happened to be down staying with George, and I said, look, they're twisting my arm and wanted to do more Rutles and things like that. And he said, oh, which one of you is going to get shot? So I said, precisely, George. I said, where's the fun in that? And he said, well, I think you should milk it for all it's got, And I said, well, I'm not sure I want to do that. And he said, well, I don't call every 18 years milking it. So.
In terms of George Harrison having been so involved, did that come through you and the Bonzo connection, through Eric? How did he come to be involved?
Well, Eric and George became good friends because they seemed to sort of be rather careless with their wives at the same time. And so I got to see George a bit more often in those days, because he came down to the pub and mixed about, and he came on Rutland Weekend Television. Of all the Beatles, George was the one that wanted to put the suit in the cupboard and move on. He was the first to leave. And he didn't like it the way it was. He didn't like the way it was just getting. It was too big, And once the media gets hold of big things, it becomes, the theme of the soundbite of the thing of everything, and he didn't like that, And he's as a sort of thoughtful person, also a very funny person, it didn't sit with him, and I suppose if you made enough money, he said, I don't have to put up with this anymore, and I thought he saw the Rutles as being a way of sort of like exorcising the ghosts of Beatlemania, and said, look, we're all human beings, we all need to be, because if you mean it, all you need is love. You have to sort of take people for who they are and make compromises, and I think that's a more important message than fame and fortune, which is not the way the media plays it, they're even sort of talking about heat waves, this is a record. The planet is burning, and you're talking about records? Well, somebody needs to put the brakes on, and I feel kind of qualified in that way, because I was the one in the Bonzos, because lunacy was all around me, and it's like a sports car. It went really fast. But if we're going to use it again, somebody needs to put the brakes on every now and again. So that's the way I feel about the world in general at the moment. You can't condemn anything, the excitement or whatever. Let it be, but it's got to come back to what's right and wrong within the human scale and the nature of things. I see. I can get quite pompous. And the older I get, the more I discover what I'm good at, and that's hypocrisy.